All right. Looks like it's up and running. We can hope. So, good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to come together down here in sunny Florida. As most of you know, there was a rather large dump of snow up in the Northeast in the last day or so. And people are saying that New York, in fact, got off quite easy. They were really worried about there being a big snowstorm like there was last year, the snowpocalypse and all the other things they came up with. But it seemed to miss. So does that mean we can say there was a miracle?
Oh, that would be unfair, because then what happened to Boston, which was inundated? In fact, in my house, the pipes burst and my house is flooded.
Ow. Oh, wow. So you're saying if we call it a miracle that New York was spared, then we'd have to call it a miraculous punishment for your house.
That's true.
And you're uncomfortable with that?
I'm a little uncomfortable with that, yes. Yes, it did.
You had a broken pipe.
Yes, pipes froze and burst.
No, you had your water running in the house.
I did, but what happened is the heater got overworked and stopped working.
Oh my God. Hey, there's nothing you can do about it. You're here.
I'm here.
So it is a little bit.
But considering calling New York a miracle leaves me feeling very uncomfortable.
If we were to say, instead of New York being spared, let's say, for example, you were looking at a neighborhood and you had, houses all along the neighborhood, and these houses, like that, were buried in snow, and this house wasn't. Miracle?
A test.
A test? A test from who? Your fifth grade geography teacher?
It's a test from the Lord.
For the people here or the people here?
All of them.
For everyone.
To see who's the better neighbor, perhaps. We don't know.
We don't know, but you would believe that this was divinely orchestrated.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I would not.
You would not?
I would say God created the world and the winds and the rains and the sun and all, and then has left it to operate in natural ways. And this is what happens. Tsunamis happen. It's not because people are bad. And good places, people get nice sunshine, doesn't necessarily mean that people were good. It's the way
this house had no snow.
Yeah, because of the wind, just the blew.
So maybe you're saying
natural
that,
forces.
let me switch colors here. Maybe the wind happened to be breaking because maybe there was a big tree or something over here. And so the wind blew to these sides and left that one empty.
But now the opportunity they have for charity.
And certainly the response, no one's denying that the guy who's here should probably help shovel the other two. That would definitely be the appropriate response. But would this person then say or not say the blessing for a miracle being done on their behalf? In Judaism, we do believe that there is a blessing that can be said when you have had a miracle done on your behalf. We also say blessings for miracles that were done on all of our behalves. We're going to be talking about one such event in this Torah portion, the whole leaving Egypt thing, right? We do generally consider our exodus from Egypt to be miraculous. Yes? No? Maybe? Okay, well, yes. What's that?
Some do,
some do, some don't.
Strive for natural, socio-political explanations.
So,
For the seas party?
are we having trouble?
Strong wind.
Because if it's natural, it's not a miracle, and if it's a miracle, it can't be explained naturally. Is that where our conversation seems to be hinging?
So what are the theories that miracles by definition are beyond natural?
Well, that seems to be the question. Is if I posit there was a tree that was blocking the wind that made the wind sweep on either side of my house, then that means it wasn't a miracle, it was just a tree. And on the other hand, if the waters parted for no discernible natural reason when we left Egypt, that makes it a miracle, and therefore something that's worthy of our praise.
One more step in that. Not
Yes?
only did the waters part, but Moses said the waters were going to part. So it didn't just happen on a random basis. It happened when it was supposed to happen.
So it was.
So the timing is important too.
It was controlled in some way,
Right.
or timed, or appropriate to the moment, in a way that, pardon the platypus, that was discernible to us, is what you're saying.
Right.
We could recognize in that act that something happened that would not normally have ever happened, and was happening at exactly the time when it needed to happen for the best benefit to us.
If it started snowing now, we would say, wow, that's really unusual. If you, Rabbi Neely, said it's going to snow in 1 minute, and then it starts snowing in 1 minute, then that puts it in a different realm.
Does it put the event in a different realm, or does it put me in a different realm?
Both.
So if it starts snowing a minute from now and no one predicted it, then that's not a miracle. God had nothing to do with it.
I don't know.
But who made the laws of nature?
Okay. Let's talk about the biggest miracle that people like to talk about, which is the parting of the sea. Because we're going to have to come back to that little logical operator at some point. But I want to get some text under our belt before we keep going. The parting of the sea is held up by both traditional and modern sources as being one of the paradigmatic examples of a miracle that is done publicly and incontrovertibly. If anything is a miracle, the parting of the sea is a miracle. And if the parting of the sea is not a miracle, then nothing's a miracle. It's often the way the logical lines of debate are drawn. Right? We understand how this becomes kind of the poster child for those that are either attacking the existence of miracles or for those that are defending the existence of miracles. So let's actually talk about what happened with the sea, shall we? Good. So turn to page 405. We are in chapter 14 of the book of Exodus, and we're going to begin at the end in order to understand the poem that we're going to be doing. The end of chapter 14, that is. So we're on verse 30 down there at the bottom, because we're not going to go through the prose version. I want to do the poetic version. All right. Harriet, if you're our de facto, sure.
Thus the Lord delivered Israel that day from the Egyptians. Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the shore of the sea. And when Israel saw the wondrous power which the Lord had wielded against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord. They had faith in the Lord and his servant Moses.
All right. So first of all, let's get this phrase "wondrous power" back into the more literal translation, because I think it is helpful. What phrase is JPS, the Jewish Publication Society, using to describe wondrous power?
Hand of God.
The hand, the great hand, right? Yada Gedolah. It's the great. He saw the great hand, and what it did, right? That what God did. So this is the hand of God, not the wondrous power. This is the hand of God at work, was what the people believed when the sea parted. They went through, and the Egyptians were wiped out by the waters returning. Right? And the hand of God has a slightly different connotation, am I right?
Yeah.
Than just wondrous power? Right. So what does it mean that they saw the hand of God? And how would they know that they had seen the hand of God rather than just a pretty sunset, rather than just a natural phenomenon that was just going on at the time? Right. That is going to be our problem when trying to differentiate between something that is miraculous and something that isn't. But we have to hold that up as our standard, is where would you say this is the hand of God? You didn't seem to be entirely convinced by the parting of the snow for leaving the house empty. So where would you be convinced to say this is the hand? Okay, well, let's take a look at the poem and you tell me whether you would have sung as well. We are now chapter 15.
Then Moses and the Israelites sang this song to the Lord. They said, I will sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. Horse and driver he has hurled into the sea. The Lord is my strength and might. He has become my deliverance. This is my God, and I will enshrine him.
Keep going.
The God of my father, and I will exalt him. The Lord, the warrior, Lord is his name. Pharaoh's chariots and his army he has cast into the sea, and the pick of his officers are drowned in the sea of reeds.
Note, footnote, we are talking the Sea of Reeds here. This is not the Red Sea. Very important consideration, as you'll see later on. Keep going.
The deeps covered them. They went down into the depths like a stone. Your right hand, O Lord, glorious in power. Your right hand, O Lord, shatters the foe. In your great triumph, you break your opponents. You send forth your fury, it consumes them like straw. At the blast of your nostrils, the waters piled up. The floods stood straight like a wall. The deeps froze in the heart of the sea.
All right, we're going to pause there.
Mm.
All right, so obviously very stirring stuff. It'll be even more stirring when we get to read it for Sisterhood Shabbat this coming Saturday. Hand of God? Let me take you off the hook. Did the Israelites at the time, as recorded in this poetic song, consider the parting of the sea and their escape from Egypt to be the hand of God?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Are we safe on saying that?
Yes.
Why?
That's what they said.
That's what they said. Your right hand.
Not why do you think that
Oh, why
they
do they-
thought that this was the hand of God? Not what proof do you have that that was their idea? What proof do you think they used to convince themselves that it was the hand of God? That is to say, what was it about the event that convinced them?
Was there also the pillar of fire?
The pillar of fire preceded this very much, yes.
So this is all
The cumulative effect,
right.
The months of plagues and everything going on in Egypt, and now the culminated with the pillar of fire, which they also had some trouble with the whole idea of what you brought us out here to die. And now the sea begins to part and they go through. So it's the cumulative effect.
The sea parts and lets them all go through and then closes in on Pharaoh.
And the closing as well. Our tradition is very clear that it wasn't just the parting that was important, it was also the closing that was important. The seeing the people dead on the shore may sound like a macabre detail. Our Midrash says, no, that was because the Israelites thought, well, maybe the Egyptians escaped the other side too. And seeing them dead meant, no, this was more than just that. They're not coming after you because they're going to still have to rebuild an army. So cumulative effect, right? If I flip a coin and it comes up heads, is that a miracle?
Probably not.
Probably not. If I flip a coin and it comes up heads a second time, is it a miracle?
No.
If I flip a coin 5,000 times and it comes up heads every single time,
There's something wrong with the coin.
there's something wrong with the coin. All right, you'd be searching for a natural explanation, right? And we get in the best physicists who weigh the coin and check the metallurgy and get the center of gravity is precisely where it needs to be. It is exactly as you would expect any coin to be. And yet that phenomenon is still going. Miracle?
You're getting there.
I'm getting there.
Well, if it was predicted, if somebody said, here's a...
Well, after the first 100, if I keep saying, I'm bet this is going to be head.
I don't know.
No? What if the coin flipped heads 5,000 times? And then I said, you know what? I bet you bet the next one's going to be tails, and it's tails. Is the tails now a miracle?
You're
No?
a magician.
I'm just a
You're
magician.
just a magician.
We have a very high threshold of miracle in this room. Right? Because all we said here was that the cumulative effect of what might be seen as improbable but natural events led our ancestors to believe that they had seen the hand of God. And yet I just gave you 5,000 coin flips.
Yeah.
And you told me that it was just a suspect coin, or I had some technique with my thumb.
With regard to the cumulative effect, I would think that that would be less reason to think it's a miracle because you're becoming used to it, and you were to the miraculous nature of the events. So now you're just thinking it's natural phenomenon.
Right? After 5 weeks of flipping the coin and it always coming up heads, nature now tells me coins always come up heads.
This is now my new reality.
Right? This becomes the new standard. Right. By the way, the whole coin flipping thing is very well handled and discussed in the play Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, which if you've never seen it or read it, I highly recommend it. Were any other comments on this, or shall we continue with the hand of God that maybe we're not quite seeing yet? All right, more hands?
Okay.
All hands on deck.
Well, okay.
We're on verse 9.
Yes. The foe said, I will pursue, I will overtake, I will divide the spoil. My desire shall have its fill of them. I will bear my sword, my hand shall subdue them. You made your wind blow, the sea covered them. They sank like lead in the majestic waters. Who is like you, O Lord, among the celestials? Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in splendor, working wonders? You put out your right hand, the earth swallowed them. In your love, you lead the people you redeemed. In your strength, you guide them to your holy abode.
All right, pause here. So we talked a little bit more about the pursuers being destroyed, but there seems to be an awful lot of poetry here that isn't describing the details of the event. I mean, if you were going to write a poem about the most miraculous sunset you'd ever seen, do you think the majority of the poem would be describing this, how you felt, or describing the actual sunset?
But maybe that's not the only reason we have this poem.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe one of the functions of the poem is to concretize faith in Hashem. And maybe a lot of these verses, and another element of what is miraculous is, well, Pharaoh thought he was God.
Mm-hmm.
Pharaoh did many miraculous things.
Mm-hmm.
That's Pharaoh. This is Hashem. Wow. And that trembling, that awe, I think is reflected in what Harriet just read.
So the Michamocha section that we just read, right? The who is like you among the mighty, among the celestials, among the other gods, depending upon how you want to translate that word, because it can be translated. Maybe another class will go into all the different variations. Is the purpose of this poem, or at least one of the main purposes.
That's what I think.
Right, because it's trying to say, you know, we see impressive stuff from impressive people all the time, and we see impressive stuff done on behalf of other people's gods and idols and other things all the time. That was par for the course in the ancient world. That's what they did. But this is the hand of God. This is not merely impressive showmanship and special effects. This is undeniably God. But what would make this undeniably God? Right? Rather than just a really, really lucky coincidence. What are the people claiming makes this the hand of God? Is it just because they got through the water? Why is it happening? What did the people say? Why did the waters part? Not because God's nostrils blew. That's the practical explanation of why it's happening. But what is the function of this miracle?
To let the people continue on their way to Mount Sinai.
To let the people continue on their way. In order that...
Back to God so that
They may serve God.
worship God.
Okay, so this has all over it a layer of, this isn't just a really impressive event. This is an event that is achieving a goal of God. It's not just the snow went here and the snow went there, and I feel uncomfortable calling this a miracle, because without knowing why God would want this person spared or why these people would get snow, I don't feel happy calling that a miracle. But if I can describe it in the sense of, it is letting these people go so that they can be connected to God once again without the interference and oppression of the Egyptians. Now I can begin to see how they would believe that God would have done this for them, rather than just it's a random natural phenomenon. Does that make some sense? When you see the description back in verses 9, where the pursuers are coming with this hate and bloodthirstiness, and I am going to take and pillage and destroy and all of this, you begin to get a feeling of the desperation of the people, and therefore the protection that God is providing, which makes it more miraculous, right? If the waters had parted and then closed, and there was just one guy standing there with his staff going, wow, that was really cool. Nobody was saved by that parting. Nobody was allowed to move on to the next stage of Mount Sinai. It was just, well, that's cool. But it could have still been a natural event. Whether it was natural or not is not necessarily going to play into our question of whether it was miraculous, whether it had a function, or more importantly, whether it had a recognized function, I think is going to be what's going to be our defining point. And obviously that's one of the reasons why Shirat Hayam, the song, continues in verse 15 as it does. Or sorry, verse 14, I believe, is where we left off.
The peoples hear, They tremble. Agony grips the dwellers in Philistia. Now are the clans of Edom dismayed. The tribes of Moab, trembling grips them. All the dwellers in Canaan are aghast. Terror and dread descend upon them. Through the might of your arm, they are still as stone, till your people cross over, O Lord. Till your people cross, whom you have ransomed. You will bring them and plant them in your own mountain, the place you made to dwell in, O Lord. The sanctuary, O Lord, which your hands established, the Lord will reign forever and ever.
Right? The event is not just an interesting geological, oceanographic phenomenon. It's not just God demonstrating power for demonstrating power's sake. The salvation of the Israelites from Egypt so they can accept Torah is part of the tapestry, the dynamism of the history that God has orchestrated in order to have us return to the land and there build a nation around Torah. And we know that that's part of it because the people who currently are living there, who moved into our house during our vacancy, are a little worried about this. Because after all, this shows through the purposefulness of this act that we will also be successful in returning home as well. That if that was the purpose, it implies a predictive element of what will come next, which is our full return to the land. That's why we need this seemingly extraneous coda to the poem, right? The normal poem should have stopped with, yay, we got out, not, and in 40 years, we, the reader knows, and the author knows, in 40 years, they're going to be going into the land of Israel. It should have just stopped where it stopped with that immediate point. But the author wanted to make sure we knew this was only miraculous because of the big picture. Does that make sense? Big, little? Okay. Let's see where we can go with this. Make sure I save one for myself. And down our two sides.
It was pretty miraculous that off the cuff, Moses and the people could come up with such a beautiful poem extemporaneously.
They were inspired, I think, is the explanation. Yes, most of us making up a song would be lucky to get past limerick, let alone this. All right. So you're already reading ahead, thanks. Miracles. When someone asks, do Jews believe in miracles? A lot of people will hem and haw. The short answer is yes, we believe in miracles. However, we never stop with that because we want to make sure that people understand that just because you call it a miracle doesn't mean I call it a miracle.
Don't most Jews believe the creation of the current state of Israel was a miracle?
I can't speak for most Jews. I will say that I would guess if we're speaking demographically about all people that are Jews, whether they are affiliated or not affiliated, I would guess the majority of them do not make that claim.
It's a natural political result.
Right.
Once they saw the results of the Holocaust.
After 2,000 years of being in diaspora?
I'm not arguing their position,
right.
But unfortunately, many do take the position either that it was a natural event, and there are others who claim it was actually a wrong event. That Israel should not have been reestablished as a secular state, that it should have been only established with the coming of the Messiah, et cetera, et cetera. Therefore, how could something in contravening God's will be classified as a miracle, no matter how improbable it might have been? So unfortunately, I don't think you can say the majority of Jews would point to the establishment of the state of Israel as a miracle of our time. The conservative movement disagrees, which is why in Yom HaAtzmaut, we do recite Hallel, and we do have special liturgy in honor of that event. But let's take it personally first, before we get nationally.
Mar ben Ravina was walking along the way in the manor of Mahoza when a wild camel attacked him. Just then,
you know how nasty those camels can be.
God. Just then, a wall of a nearby house fell down, and he took refuge inside it. When he came to Arabot, he would say the blessing, "Blessed is he who did a miracle for me in Arabot and in the matter of the camel."
Okay, so every time he came by that place again, he would remember and give thanks to God. He would say a bracha for the miracle that was done for him by having part of a wall fall down so he could hide from a camel. Is that a miracle? I was going along one day and I got a flat tire, and that meant that I was late for an appointment, but it turned out the guy that I was late for the appointment with was a complete waste of my time anyway. Thank God for the miracle of my flat tire.
The AirAsia flight in Indonesia, there was a family that missed their flight for that reason. And they were on television. Thank you, God, for the miracle of breaking down our car, or our whole family would have been wiped out on that flight.
Very true. So, therefore, all the other people who didn't get a flat tire?
Right.
They were grateful to God for their flat tire.
Okay.
They mourned the other loss. But
So in this particular case, if I was traveling with Mar Ben Ravina, would I join him in his blessing? Thank you for God for the camel that saved my friend.
Well, walls of houses don't just fall down like that. That's not an ordinary event.
You don't know what construction in the Middle East is like. especially 1,500 years ago.
Because if you see an open door, I could say, okay, a door could be open, but just at the right moment.
But an open door is even more expected.
It's expected.
So why would that be a miracle?
That wouldn't be, but a wall of a house falling down, that's something.
It goes to your question.
Except if it's your
house.
What was the purpose of Mar Ben Ravina's walk? Was he going somewhere that was important to God?
Was there a reason why either he or his travel was important and therefore protected?
Or that it was important, he had something important to do later on in life.
So
there was a purpose for him to fulfill.
So according to Judaism, according to the Talmud, as this discussion continues to unfold, and it is a fascinating discussion. If you haven't read this section of Brachot, please do. The upshot, in the smallest sense, is he says a blessing, and his children would say that blessing, but no one else would. That the rest of us, if we happen to be with him, when he's giving us this story, we would say, wow, that's an amazing story, thank God you're all right, et cetera, et cetera. But we would not be obligated to say, this is the spot where my friend, my cousin, my coworker, whatever, was saved by the wall breaking from the camel. We would not say that blessing. Because we can't claim this as a miracle incontrovertibly to the point of being able to say a blessing over it. He can, from himself, from his own spirit. Or he could choose not to and say it was just faulty construction. It's a little odd, isn't it? It seems that the label of miracle is something that is a subjective, a personal label that's being put on this. Now, if it's a national miracle, says the Talmud, like the parting of the sea, then yes, things that are national miracles, we do say a blessing over, and most notably we say Hallel for those national miracles. Make sense? Okay, and you can see that reflected in the liturgy of when we say Hallel and when we do not. All right, let's move on and see another example of a miracle.
One Friday
A
night.
personal type.
One Friday night, Hanina ben Dosa saw his daughter feeling sad.
You're never supposed to be sad Fridays, right? You're getting ready for Shabbos.
He said to my daughter, why are you sad? She said to him, I confused my vinegar jar with my oil jar, and I kindled the Shabbat light.
All right, so, this is back in the days when you didn't have candles for Shabbat, you had oil. Candles were generally considered to be inappropriate all the way up until modern times because they were usually pretty filthy, horrible things that didn't do very good giving light. So for Shabbos, you'd use oil, and she unfortunately filled the candle jug, the reservoir, with vinegar instead of oil. So now she's stuck, right? The wick's going to probably burn out whatever little bit of oil was still left in it from the last time. And then the vinegar is going to get sucked up into the wick, and that's it.
He said to her, my daughter, why should that bother you? He who told the oil to burn can tell vinegar to burn. A Tanaite statement. It continued burning all that day until they brought it flame for the Havdalah.
It must have been that not only did she kindle the light, but she said the bracha. Because otherwise she could just do it again.
Right. Shabbos must have already begun. Right. Exactly. And so, evening for Shabbos is always a little bit of a question, but clearly this seems to have happened, and she's realizing it after Shabbos has begun, so she can't make another light. Right? She's stuck with this, and it's going to go any second now because it's full of vinegar rather than oil. And what is her father's answer?
If God made oil burn, he can make vinegar burn.
Right? So, no.
So,
So why not? Why should you be upset? We can put anything in the reservoir and it'll burn.
Well, but this one did.
But this one did. Okay, but
So it's a miracle because it's not based on natural law
it's a miracle because it's not based on natural law.
and purposeful.
And it's purposeful because it's for Shabbat. But what is it also saying about the oil generally? Think about what he said to her, right? The one who told the oil to burn can also tell the vinegar to burn.
There's no natural law or reason for oil to burn.
There is no such thing as natural. The oil burning is as miraculous as the vinegar burning, right? The oil only burns because God says burn. And the vinegar will burn if God says burn.
Is that based on the idea that the earth is the Lord and all that is in it?
It's based on that and many other passages with the notion that the idea that there is a natural world that exists independent of God's will is just, what are you talking about? That's crazy talk. The only reason the oil burns is because God wants it to burn. And if God didn't want the oil to burn, you could light it 500 times and it wouldn't burn. And we would call that a miracle. The oil won't catch fire. And the vinegar burning, well, that's just because God wanted it to burn this time. So it's no more, no less miraculous than oil burning.
If we have no natural law, though,
Mm-hmm.
everything might be considered miraculous. Then how do you extrapolate the miracles from that reality?
You mean if everything's a miracle, then nothing's a miracle?
Right.
Then it's just all becomes generic. That's a good question, which leads us right into our next text. Yes,
Nature has no objective existence.
there's your sentence.
It is merely an illusion which gives man a chance to exercise his free will. But what is real is the will of Hashem and nothing else.
This is from a modern author, Rabbi Dessler, who wrote a very interesting book on this topic and many others, and science and creation and whatnot. And this is his summary of the issue. He's like, you know what? There is no natural. There is no nature. It is all time, 24/7, God's will. And we have an illusion that there is predictability, natural laws, et cetera, and that gives us then the feeling that we have free will, that we have choices from among the natural options around us, and that we then exercise our free will, we perform the commandments, and we keep Torah. But really, everything that exists in the world is in a constant state of miraculous existence, not natural.
Is there a possibility of a middle ground, i.e., God did the coding,
Mm-hmm.
if you will, set up the app.
Yeah,
The app is for oil to burn,
Mm-hmm.
and it burns.
Kind of.
But, it's still God's behind it.
Because we still have this issue of that Paula raised, but how do we then recognize the real miracles, right? How do we recognize the real stuff? If there is no nature, then what do we use to distinguish, to differentiate? How do we make, and I believe this is why the Tanya was added to our text before, how do we make Havdalah? How do we separate between Kodesh and Chol, between the holy and the mundane, if everything is in a constant state of miraculous existence?
But if there are all of these applications running in
Mhm.
the background, so to speak,
Right?
then if something happens that's unusual beyond what God has already put in place, and he chooses to put something new in place, that would be the miracle.
So, I mean, if something broke the rules, existed where it shouldn't exist according to our usual perception of natural world,
I'm just looking for a place.
you're looking for a middle ground, because you don't want to make everything a miracle, and you don't want to make nothing a miracle. Right. Okay, so, well, let's take a look at
But
a...
everything really is a miracle if you think about it, because a child being born happens millions of times
Mhm.
every day.
right?
And it's like the most unbelievable thing you could imagine.
You don't believe in children being born?
It's like a miracle.
It's like a miracle? Do we need a simile?
Really? So it doesn't have to be a once in a lifetime occurrence. It could be an everyday common occurrence and say, that's a miracle.
I mean, you don't have to pile up the waters into walls on each side for it to be a miracle.
Yes,
Right.
that's right.
Well, let's take a look and see how we then can tell which is the miracles and which are just miracles. All right, so onward.
The Holy One, blessed be he, proposed to make Hezekiah the Messiah.
All right, does everyone know who Hezekiah was? Right, one of the mostly good kings for almost all purposes of the southern kingdom of Judah, who was the king during the Assyrian invasion under Sennacherib, which was the emperor from the Assyrian Empire that had wiped out the northern kingdom. So this was one of the worst times during Jewish history, and the southern kingdom itself was now besieged by Sennacherib. And according to this teaching from the Talmud, during that time, God thought Hezekiah will be the Messiah. Hezekiah will be the Messiah. He will be the one who will redeem my people, redeem the world.
And Sennacherib would be Gog and Magog.
Right, because we need this battle between the forces of the Messiah and the forces of evil. And Sennacherib fit the bill of Gog and Magog pretty well. So why not make Hezekiah the Mashiach and just be done with it already?
The attribute of justice said before the Holy One, blessed be he.
That's not fair.
Right.
Sorry, the attribute of justice is a little whiny here.
Lord of the world. Now, if David, king of Israel, who recited how many songs and blessings before you, you didn't make him the Messiah? Hezekiah, for whom you should have done all
Now,
these
for
miracles.
whom you have done.
Oh, for whom you have done all these miracles, and who did not recite a song before you, surely should not be made Messiah.
Right, so think for a second. David wrote and sang all of the beautiful psalms and songs of thanksgiving to God, which we have many, many records of, and many others that are attributed to him. And he didn't get to be Messiah. Now, Hezekiah has also had a ton of miracles done on his behalf, but we don't have one lick of lyrics from him. No poetry coming out of Hezekiah. So it's not fair. You can't make the guy who hasn't said thank you the Messiah when you have another guy who did say thank you so well, who set the bar where it should be. So therefore,
The Lord went and
the earth.
I'm sorry, why am I saying old? The earth went and said before him, Lord of the world, I shall say a song in the place of this righteous man, so you make him Messiah.
The entire earth, which was hopeful for redemption, said, I got a song. If the song is all you need, I'll give you a song on behalf of him. Maybe he's not much of a songwriter. I'll give you a song, and then the world can be redeemed, which didn't pan out, obviously, because the Messiah still hasn't come.
But do we know what the song that the earth would have made?
I refer you to the longer discussion. This is part of a much longer discussion in Sanhedrin. Really, the Sanhedrin around the 90s and into the hundreds is a fascinating section about the end of days, the Messiah, the proto-Messiahs, and everything else that's going on. So yeah, this is Talmud. Yeah, it's an amazing section of Talmud that hurts to get your head around. Okay, so what seems to here have been the missing element? What did Hezekiah not do according to the
Gratitude.
What's that? Gratitude, right? He did not acknowledge the purpose and function of the miracles done for him. What are we reading about in this week's Torah portion? What did we just read? The song, the gratitude, right? And as the people phrased it, they didn't just say, yay, that was a fun time walking through the dry land when the waters were parted. They said, thank you, God, for saving us. Thank you for stopping those that were trying to destroy us. And thank you, God, for us knowing that you will help settle us in our land, right? They wrapped the event in gratitude. They wrapped the event in praise. And that is what made it a real miracle. That's what brings redemption. Hezekiah, apparently, at least according to the attribute of justice's rule book, did not show a proper level of gratitude. Therefore, his miracles were not redemptive. They didn't have the effect that they could have had because he lacked the ability or the willingness to show gratitude as he should.
Well, I'm going to come in on the side of Hezekiah. After the people did all this singing and dancing, isn't it probably Midrash, that God chastised them and says, my children, Pharaoh's army is dying on the shores and you're singing?
Is it Midrash? It's when the angels were
The
singing.
angels were singing. Oh, the angels were singing.
The people had a right to sing. The angels did
The
not.
angels didn't.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So if we're good and confused, it's time to go to our favorite resource, the Guide for the Perplexed, Rambam's, to help hopefully unconfuse us a little bit here.
Let's try.
All right. Nice and steady, because it gets a little dense.
Okay. How bad and injurious is the blindness of ignorance. Say to a person who is believed to belong to the wise men of Israel that the Almighty sends his angel to enter the womb of a woman and to form there the fetus, he'll be satisfied with the account. He will believe it and even find in it a description of the greatness of God's might and wisdom. Although he believes that the angel consists of burning fire and is as big as a third part of the universe, yet he considers it possible as a divine miracle.
Right. So if someone says, Rabbi, where do babies come from? And you say, well, an angel from God enters the womb of the woman and implants the fetus there. And the guy says, but I thought angels were made of fire. And if you put fire inside of a person, and aren't angels like just enormous? It's a miracle. God can do anything, no problem. And people are satisfied, right? If you tell them an angel does it, no problem. However, says Rambam, and remember, this is 1,000 years ago.
But tell him that God gave the seed a formative power which produces and shapes the limbs, and that this power is called angel, and he will turn away, because he cannot comprehend the true greatness and power of creating forces that act in a body without being perceived by our senses.
Right? It's just natural. You've taken the mystery, you've taken the miracle out of it. If you take the fiery angel out, you just tell me that that's what the seed does. It's just sort of dull. And yet, what is Rambam saying?
It should be, that's the miracle.
It should be viewed as a miracle. It's every bit as miraculous as saying some third the size of the universe fiery angel is able to go harmlessly into a woman's stomach and plant a fetus. The fact that God could create a seed that would have within it the capacity to create life like this should be equally astonishing to us and should cause equal praise and glory to God. And yet, says Rambam, that's not the way the average world works. Most of us prefer the flash rather than this. But he's not done. We're not done with Rambam yet, no.
For although the rod was turned into a serpent, the water into blood, the pure and noble hand into a leprous one, without the existence of any natural cause that could affect these or similar phenomena, these changes were not permanent. They have not become a physical property.
All right, so again, like most things with Rambam, there's a lot more that he's talking about for this. This is a small excerpt, even though the paragraphs look big. And he's trying to say here that the miracles did not become lasting features of the regular working of the world, right? That the parting of the sea, the staff that turned into a snake, you should not expect that to happen again. That did not become a property of the sea. That did not become a property of the staff.
And that's why it's a miracle.
It's not why it's a miracle, but it's why it is not destructive and disruptive to God's natural world. That despite the miracles, the overarching miracle of creation continues without interruption. Because that was a big concern for Rambam and should be a big concern for us as well. Because as you say, if everything is a miracle, nothing is. Well, it's even worse than that. If everything is a miracle, then we have no idea how to run our life. Because who knows what's going to happen between this moment and the next. And Rambam wanted to make sure that despite the miracles, we understood that it was not permanently bending, breaking, violating, changing the natural laws. That could be counted on. God's laws are not to be moved. Okay, so he goes on.
On the contrary, the universe continues its regular, predictable course. Yeah. Our sages said that the miracles are to some extent also natural.
Right. Even the miracle itself can also be seen as natural. Not only the miracle might have interrupted the natural world, which then reverted to normal, but the miracle itself could be considered part of the natural world according to the sages in the Midrash.
For they say, When God created the universe with its present physical properties, he made it part of these properties, that they should produce certain miracles at certain times. And the sign of a prophet consisted in the fact that God told him to declare when a certain thing will take place. But the thing itself was affected according to the fixed laws of nature.
Keep going.
Wow.
Just want to finish the paragraph.
This testifies to the greatness of the author and shows that he held it to be impossible that there should be a change in the laws of nature or a change in the will of God after they have once been established.
Okay, so let's get our heads around this little philosophy here. So this is Rambam interpreting the Midrash, which says that at on the sixth day, at the last hour of creation, God created these miracles and set them aside for use at some point in the future. Right? He's interpreting that to mean that the parting of the sea was encoded within the creation of the universe. That from the moment of the Big Bang, God set the energy flow, the atoms, and everything else in the universe in the right direction, and the natural laws of the universe, that at one point, there would be a parting of the sea at this moment, this day, this hour, this time. And that was it. God did not change anything at that moment. It was all planned from the beginning.
It just unfolded.
And it just unfolded. And the miracle was that Moses knew when it was about to happen.
Right.
And so that he could coordinate the Exodus to take advantage of it and be able to show the people that this was happening.
Okay, so it was going to happen at this time.
Mhm.
We had to be there at the right time,
Exactly right.
rather than it happened because we got there.
The flight was taking off at 12:03.
You better be there.
And if you had missed the gate, the flight would have left. And if you'd come early, you would have just seen it sitting on the tarmac.
What about, what was his name, the guy who ran into the water?
It's a lovely midrash.
Yes.
Nachshon. Yeah, it's a lovely midrash. According to Rambam, it's a lovely midrash talking about faith and talking about
something. You got to do the footwork.
well, and it could even be built into this that he had enough faith that he knew that by the time he got in, the waters would part. Right? That this wasn't dangerous. It was, yeah, I'm just going to start walking now because I know that another 5, 4, 3, it's happening. Is that bad? I mean, do we feel uncomfortable saying that all of the plagues were pre-orchestrated?
What difference does it make? I'm not understanding why it's important, whether it's one way or the other.
So there's the philosophical difference that's whether or not God is constantly changing and tinkering with the natural world. And that's partly what Rambam's talking about. But most of us aren't philosophers and we're not too worried about those issues, although it's good to study in another time. But does it mean to us about what is a miracle, what isn't a miracle, what do we acknowledge as a miracle, what do we call a miracle, and what are we willing to praise as a miracle? And if we believe that all of the big miracles, the great miracles that happen within the Torah and the Tanakh were all pre-orchestrated. You know, this was not ad-libbed at the moment, but this was something that God already had planned, and it was just sitting off stage, and it came on, did its shtick, and then moved off.
It's still a miracle.
But many people, just like with the angel and the seed, with regards to the childbirth, might feel that God has somehow been diminished. And what Rambam is trying to say here is exactly your point, Howie. No, that doesn't diminish. That makes the author even greater, right? When the author has actually left you clues and guidance all the way through the entire novel, so that by the time you get to the end, you look back and go, oh, I see the foreshadowing now. You consider that to be a good author. If the author pulls out some weird ending to the story that nothing has pointed to and there's been no building up to it and it's just entirely unsatisfactory. And yet within our own lives, we tend to reverse those and say, no, I like the surprises. That's a real miracle. The stuff that was predictable and normal and already, shown as being part of God's world. Yeah, that's everyday stuff. And Rambam saying the opposite.
So if all good things
Mhm.
that happened were preordained,
Mhm.
does that mean that all the bad things that have happened are also preordained?
So Rambam goes into much more detail about the good, the bad, and the ugly that happens in the world. And at the moment, we're only going to focus on this. So he leaves much of the bad on the doorstep of man, meaning that much of the bad that happens in the world was not preordained by God, but was the fulfillment of our will. And we've chosen to live badly, or sometimes things that we consider to be bad are not really bad. I mean, those were two of his biggest ways of covering it. But most harm, in his opinion, is self-inflicted, either by ourselves directly or by ourselves collectively, meaning that, you know, someone over there shoots me. That wasn't preordained that he would shoot me, but it happened because of his choice. That's his short answer to that, but there's a much longer discussion to it. But what he's really focusing on here are the things that we consider and can see that seem to deviate from the norm. And he's trying to say they are part of the norm. And in fact, it may be hard to tell what's the greatest and what's the smallest, what's the massive and what's the regular, but all of it should be considered to be part of the author's work. And therefore, all of it is worthy of gratitude, praise, and thanksgiving. And yet we tend to focus on one more than the other.
I've been reading some of the scientific explanations recently for this thing where they said there's a lot of red soil in Africa near the Nile River, and periodically when it rains a lot, it floods and all that red soil goes into the Nile and looks like it turns red.
Right.
And I'm saying, what? It was just a natural thing? But now you're telling me that to look at it differently.
Right.
God created it that way, knowing that it would need to happen at the right time.
And there was a person called Moses who could see that this was what was orchestrated to happen, and used it to free his people from slavery. Right? Is that somehow less wondrous?
Just as a scientist can explain it, does it make it less wondrous?
Just because we can now, perhaps, and it's a big question mark, but just if we could now perhaps explain why the plagues happened from natural phenomenon, the fact that somebody was able to understand, because of their closeness to God, what was coming down the road, so that they could use that as an opportunity to free their people from slavery, we may feel somehow cheated because it's not flashy enough or it's not special enough. But I mean, isn't that more miraculous that God had a communication with a person to help them understand how best to use his world for justice and freedom and goodness? Oh, wait, that's what we call everything in Judaism. Right? That's the whole point of revelation. And this may have happened with better special effects, but it's part of the entire whole, which is God reveals to his prophets, Moses being chief among them. We'll be talking more about prophets this coming Sunday at 10:30, in order that we will know how to use the natural world to make a miraculous life, right? To make the miracles happen. Because that flood could have happened with the red stuff in the soil, and if it hadn't been taken advantage of to liberate the people, it would have just been a weird event. You know, they would have chiseled it on the rock. Yeah, there's some weird red stuff in the soil this year. Unusual frog activity. You know,
well, once the red soil comes down, the fish can't survive. So when the frogs have no food, they jump out of the Nile.
Right, and then when they rot, they create the insects, and the insects drive the animals mad. Yeah, I've seen that the hypothesis too. Yes.
This is so beautiful. I've never seen this as an explanation that is still God at work.
So let's go ahead and get the kicker from Rambam here, and then we'll move on since our time is running short.
He therefore assumes that God gave the waters the property of joining together and of flowing in a downward direction.
By the way, those are the normal properties of water we still talk about, you know, surface tension and laws of attraction and, you know, going to the lowest point.
And of separating only at the time when the Egyptians were drowned and only in a particular place.
Right, that was a natural thing, but it was a one-time thing. Right, it was still part of that was part of programming the water at the time of creation, of what surface tension would be like and what everything else would be like. And by the way, on this day in Nisan, you're going to split, and also you're going to. There's just a little bit of code put into the overall program.
It is said there, Rabbi Jonathan said, or Yonatan said, God made an agreement with the sea that it should divide before the Israelites. Thus it is said, and the sea returned to its strength when the morning appeared, from Exodus. Rabbi Jeremiah, son of Elazar, said, not only with the sea, but with all that has been created in the 6 days of the beginning. This is referred to in the words, I, even my hands, have stretched out the heavens, and all their host have I commanded. And that's from Isaiah. And that is to say, I have commanded the sea to divide, the fire not to hurt Hanina, Mishael, and Azariah, the lions not to harm Daniel, and the fish to spit out Jonah. The same is the case with the rest of the miracles.
Even as God stretched out the heavens, he laid in these commands among the host. All right? It's not that God suddenly went, ooh, Dano's in trouble. Better make those lions not do anything. this was part of the code. As God stretched it out, he embedded within it lines of code that would be run at certain points and for certain reasons.
God doesn't get surprised.
God doesn't get surprised.
He kind of knows.
Succinctly put, we could have summarized the whole half hour.
That's right. God doesn't get surprised.
Exactly.
That's
God,
the purpose in life is succinct.
to cut it down to the bullet point, God doesn't get surprised. Exactly right. All right, so that means that there are certain things as well that God can't do. Because oftentimes this whole discussion of miracle versus natural, we put God in opposition to the natural world, right? It's like God is somehow breaking the rules or changing the rules or doing things differently than nature would allow normal things to happen. And that's what makes God God, is because God can break the rules. And Rambam points out, no, that's not what makes God God. What makes God God is because of the nature of existence, the nature of his omnipotence, the nature of his preordaining of many of the events of reality. That's what makes God God. And if you try to say God can do anything, read the next paragraph.
It is impossible that God should produce a being like himself, or annihilate, or make himself corporeal, or change himself. The power of God is not assumed to extend to any of these impossibilities.
Right? So although the medieval church would spend a lot of time arguing about how many angels on the head of a pin and could God make a boulder that he can't lift,
Right.
Judaism had no problem with that. Because we said, no, God is God. And by nature of being God, there are certain things that God could not logically do and still be called God, which would mean there was something else God that wasn't the God we thought was God. For example, God can't kill himself. Then if God could, God would not be God by definition. God cannot make another God equal to himself. If God could, then there would be two gods, and now we'd be lowercase g, and saying, well, there must be something greater than those because that's not what God is.
Put that model, please, in changing himself.
So in changing himself, according to Rambam, and I think argued very well, God is not susceptible to change. Meaning, all of the language of "and God regretted," and God decided, and God remembered is there as the language of for us.
Right.
But God did not suddenly alter, because to alter implies that there is room within God for something to flip back and forth, right? A toggle switch implies that there is a down position which is not currently occupied, which makes it imperfection in God.
Oh.
Right? And it also implies that God was imperfect until he became perfect by changing. Yes, this is where the gray matter starts leaking out the ear, where
Yes.
we begin to truly come to grips with the notion God isn't like us. And it's really, really hard for us to understand the full extent to which God is not like us. And when we say God can't change, we think, well, that's horribly limiting. But then when we recognize change, by definition, implies movement and alteration and moving from a less perfect to a more perfect, or from a more perfect to a less perfect state, how could God change? Can God go from one perfection to another? That's like saying I went from infinity to infinity plus one. Well, that's still infinity.
It's going from almighty to less mighty.
Or from less mighty to almighty. Either way.
That's a contradiction
Yeah.
for being
Yeah.
immortal and invincible.
Right. So
Almighty.
if God is God, God can't be anything less than or more than, as if there were such a thing as more than, God. And change would imply some alteration in that calculation.
God said that.
Right. It's
I am
the
that I am.
it's the old, God is God. It can't be God equals God plus one, or God equals God minus one. There can't be a change on one side of the equation without breaking the equation.
There's a theory, I don't know if that's the right word, there's a theory that God puts a set of occurrences into motion
Mm-hmm.
for the people. We screw up, he goes to plan B.
Yes.
We screw up, you go down the alphabet.
Yes.
Isn't that's not change?
That's not change.
Okay.
It's only change if we could surprise God. right? So,
You already knew all
yeah, so
there's no such thing as free will.
well,
You
that
already
gets
know.
okay. So
That's a great.
then we get into another kicker, which is if I've already seen the movie, does that mean the actors didn't have free will when they did it, or they don't have the free will on the screen at the time? So the short answer is from our tradition is that no, God has seen everything, but yes, we have free will.
He didn't tell us.
Unfortunately, sometimes you think we might have liked that. And the idea that we're ending up on plan, Z number 304 is not a surprise to God. And the fact that we had to go through all of the plans leading up to that is part of what will get us eventually to where we need to be.
Thanks.
But it is a very difficult concept to wrestle with. And part of the reason why it's so difficult is that we often emphasize human free will because that is our main responsibility, is changing our behavior and improving our behavior. And if we believe for a moment that our behavior's change could not bring redemption to ourselves or to the world tomorrow, there would be a lot less incentive to change. And the fact is that many of us, if we believe that God already has it mapped out because he's already seen it, we would doubt that tomorrow is the scheduled day. But if we think we can force God's hand, then we might try harder. And so it's a very useful metaphor. And the fact of the matter is, we don't know if tomorrow after 5,000 coin flips, it's going to come up heads and it's going to be the redemption day. So we're put into a pickle by our own feelings, which is what's going to lead us hopefully neatly into our next paragraph.
Miracles are only convincing to those who witnessed them, while coming generations who know them only from the account given by others may consider them as untrue. But miracles cannot continue and last for all generations. All these miracles were wonderful, public, and witnessed by the people. But God knew that in future, people might doubt the correctness of the account of these miracles in the same manner as they doubt the accuracy of other narratives.
Which is what we've seen time and time again with regards to the splitting of the sea and just about everything else. Which is why Judaism does not rely upon miracles as the evidence of our faith. But what it does rely upon is our willingness to acknowledge a miracle. Right? So there's a very maybe fine distinction here, but big in the long term, right? We don't need to convince you that the miracle happened in order to convince you that Torah is true and that God is true. But if you lack the capacity to recognize a miracle as a miracle, in any case, like never, then you lack the capacity to truly understand God's presence in the world and part in our life. Right? It's the acknowledgement of the miracle that is our goal, not the proof of the miracle. Because you can't prove it for anyone else except you. Right? The guy who fell through the broken wall to get rid of to get away from that camel, he knows in his heart that it is a miracle. And he will say a blessing to God every time he walks by that house, that God saved him. He can't prove it to anyone else. But if his heart does not allow him to acknowledge that moment as a miracle for himself, any more than if our hearts refuse to acknowledge that the Exodus out of Egypt was a miracle, regardless of the details of the historical account, then we've become dead to the notion that God is connected to this world. And God becomes an abstract idea that has no power or influence over our lives. Right? So it's not a question of proving the miracles, but it's a question of acknowledging the miracles. And we'll finish off with Josephus.
Let no one wonder at the strangeness of the narration.
Even 2,000 years ago, the Exodus sounded a little wonky.
Whether it happened by the will of God or whether it happened of its own accord, let everyone determine as he pleases.
Right? So it's like, look, I can't prove to you the Exodus happened. I didn't have the VCR running, right? I wasn't there. I didn't have the pictures taken. And even if I were there, and even if I had the videos taken, you probably still wouldn't believe me, because we've had amazing videos of reproductive exoduses. The most recent one, what was it called? Empire and God or whatever, where they did a tidal wave for the parting of the sea, by the way. I can simulate anything. So that's no proof. If you're going to believe it, believe it. And if you're not going to believe it, I can't change you. but you should. Because it's the act of believing in the miracles that have happened and their purpose, and I erased all that, and their purpose and their function and the effect that they have in the world and what they are trying to guide us towards, that gives the miracle its power. That gives the miracle its true effect in this world. Right? I'm afraid I can't point to who said it. This isn't just a pretty poem that was there to describe the details of the day. This is a message, right? Trying to say what the day means, what the events mean. And it's that meaning that we have to grab onto, and it's the meaning we have to find in the miracles that happen in our own life, which are as constant as this moment, and that moment, and that moment. As normal as the water staying in the bottle, as the pen being able to write on the board, or as the pen being able to fall from gravity. These are all equally miraculous as the splitting of the sea, if in them we recognize God's authorship of the world.
So what does, going back to what you were talking about in the beginning of the use of the Hallel prayer, what did the sages mean, by that prayer, and when's appropriate and inappropriate?
What they meant was that at these moments of national deliverance, of a national miracle, we had a particular lesson to learn from that occasion. And we therefore have to both express our gratitude that it happened and also study and learn what unique teaching there is that's encapsulated by this event. Whereas our personal miracles, we each will navigate that individually. But these were like cardinal points within our nation's history and our nation's psyche that needed to be transmitted and celebrated.
But like Rambam would argue, I think, that there's no need to ever do Hallel.
No, actually, Rambam talks about Hallel in some detail in this section, if you go to Moreh Nevuchim. But he talks about the fact that there were certain lessons in these that needed to be universalized. And it wasn't that they were more miraculous than the mundane, so-called. It's simply that they marked a certain chapter heading that needs a teachable moment that needs to be preserved in order for us to get to the big picture. It's not that we couldn't learn it somewhere else, but this was set as the curriculum, and therefore needs to be part of the continued teachings of our traditions.
It's fascinating to me, though, that, all right, for Yom HaAtzmaut, I can understand it, for that day. But the day that Jerusalem was liberated by Chief Rabbi Goren, at that moment, he had this presence to get a shofar. Did he recite Hallel then? At that moment? No. We do in our shul on Yom Yerushalayim today.
Correct.
But I wonder why, of all people, he didn't do that.
So declaring that it is a miracle of purpose, or declaring it is a miracle with Hallel, means we A, say this is a national liberation, and B, we say we understand the purpose of this day. I'm not sure, apart from the parting of the sea, that we always were aware of the purpose of the moment when it happened. Sometimes we're not aware of the purpose of the
liberation of Jerusalem.
At that moment.
Does that mean redemption is in my lifetime, or does it mean redemption is going to be 10 generations down?
I think
How do we interpret that? Is this the beginning of redemption, or is this the beginning of the end of redemption?
part of one of the questions is when you acknowledge that something was a miracle, do you acknowledge it contemporaneously, or is it in hindsight you go, wow, that was a miracle?
So certainly everyone recognizes that the reunification of Jerusalem is a massive point within our history of moving towards redemption. But so was the first Aliyah.
Yeah.
So was the resuscitation of Hebrew as a natural language. And so we don't know where each one of these parts falls into that tapestry of the events that will be totally moving. Obviously, it's a big one. But is this the one we celebrate? Or is it when Jerusalem is finally at peace do we celebrate? At which point along the timeline does it become the day?
Well, the 20 years after, or whatever time period, the Jewish community decided yes, it is.
that it's a
time.
significant day. Exactly, and that it has a point that we now refer to as being a liminal moment where we have crossed a new threshold in the march towards redemption.
But like there's all
But
those
it takes us a while to figure that out.
Absolutely. Like I said, only when we crossed out of the sea from Egypt could we tell immediately what it meant. And even there, if you look at it, the very next day we're already complaining.
Now
So,
I understand what you meant by that.
Right.
That's good.
like Hanukkah, probably.
like Hanukkah indeed, I mean, when they first did the first Hanukkah, they had no idea that this was going to become an annual holiday.
Right.
It wasn't until the following year they said, you know what? Now we can do Sukkot at its regular time, but we should still also commemorate what happened when we were able to do this last year. And let's keep doing it. Okay. Thank you very much to everyone.
Thank you.
Keep studying. Hope to see everyone here for Sisterhood Shabbat. And also on Sunday, we're doing Worldwide Wrap for the morning minyan. So that'll be a lot of fun. And if you can come with tefillin or want to learn how to use tefillin, please do. It's also a great dugma instruction for our youngsters. And also on Sunday at 10:30 after the Worldwide Wrap and Minyan, we'll be doing our general study session on mitzvot. And tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. 7 o'clock at Ohev Shalom, Body and Soul, a great movie is being shown about contemporary Israel. Okay, I think I got all the commercials. Hold on a second. Let me just stop here.